All right. Well, Jeremy, how about we start it up?
Yeah, man. Let's do this.
Well, welcome everyone in the gallery and joining us virtually. My name is Matt Chapman, co-owner of Curio Gallery and Creative Supply. We are here with artist Jeremy Waak, and we are having our artist talk in response to the exhibition Post-Industrialism Fetish. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's been a really exciting month and a half-ish in the gallery. A lot of people catch it from the window, and then like you see them kind of like bend over and like look through, and then they, they decide, oh yeah, we should go down and check it out, and they come right in, and they're totally into it. But usually the first question they ask is like, what's Jeremy's background? Because they look at these and they first assume you have construction work under your belt, or they assume that you're an engineer or something like that. So when I explain to them what you do, they're like, oh man, that's really interesting. And then they come and they check out the wall text, and that really brings them in too. But perhaps you can explain for our guests just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. First, I want to thank everyone for coming. Those of you here in person, rock on. Those of you joining us remotely, welcome. Two things that I'll say right at the begin. One, I don't often pronounce things clearly, so if you don't understand what I'm saying, just raise a hand. The second is I'm going to try to avoid profanity, but I promise nothing. I'll do my best.
That's fine.
Okay. So I think the first thing I should start with is I was born and raised in Nebraska, and I think that's had a big impact on me. The idea of the pioneering spirit, that whatever made people go way out in the middle of the boondocks as far as their world was concerned and set up a new life, I think carries on, or it becomes part of the culture. And I took it for granted until I moved out of the Midwest and the Plains areas. And so I say that because I think that tenacity, that just make stuff up, that you don't have to be an expert to try something mentality, you just wing it, oftentimes is impacted me quite a bit. I find it really fascinating that people think that I might be an engineer because I pretend to be one in my own head. I'm not an engineer, and actually my love of precision has sort of taken on a little bit of a wrestling match with my desires or interests in engineering. Engineering is about real precision, and there's processes you can go through to be super precise that I absolutely despise. So I avoid them and do a lot of things by hand, and just carefully try to make them accurate by hand, but they're always going to be less than precise. So I think that's funny, because I'm kind of subverting that in my own way, if that makes sense.
Totally. Absolutely makes sense. So, you spoke a moment about the precision and the perfection, but the imperfection of them. And that's another thing that people usually marvel at, is just that, like, oh my gosh, like these are made by hand. These weren't. Most people will say, like, are these 3D printed, or these casts or molds? And I say the only ones that are cast are the ones that are behind us. But most people will just like sit and marvel at the precision of them. And it's really fun to just kind of like watch people like try to figure out how they're made or how they connect to the boards. And I feel like you could probably talk at length about like how to hide those little pieces or make them feel as if they're just like just hanging there by themselves, or there's some like magic power behind there holding them up. But it's really fascinating to watch people experience
Wizardry.
Yeah, for sure.
Very big wand. So I love things that are precise. I love quality craft. I feel like for art to mean anything to me, there has to be just enough structure and just enough accuracy for me to believe in the expertise, the voice of the artist is somebody I should pay attention to. If it's poorly crafted, I'm like, well, why should I believe anything this person has to say? If they can't even bother to get around putting these things together well. But like I said, I also don't, like the process is really important to me. So I love to work by hand. And I love sometimes quiet. Machines are often noisy and they're dangerous, you have PPE to put on. Sometimes that can just be too much, can get in the way. So a lot of this stuff is done by hand, and it's just precise enough to fool people that don't measure it. But if you look at it really closely, if you like examine it to the edges of the boards, or if you were to measure it, you'll find all kinds of inconsistencies to that. And like I said a little bit earlier, I've actually really engaged with that on purpose. I will consciously in my studio wrestle with, okay, do I spend 30 minutes setting up the milling machine and make all these holes exact? Or do I spend 15 minutes making them pretty close and then go rah, rah, rah? More and more, I'll go to the sort of caveman hits rock system, because I want a little personality to these pieces. I absorb a lot on Instagram. I only do art on Instagram, and I follow people that are impressive to me in one way or another. And some of them are like watchmakers, clockmakers, ridiculous accuracy. And I love what they do, and I love the work when it's done. But almost always there's a loss of a personality. It becomes a produced product and not an individual with a bit of a character to it. And art for me is all about character. It's all about individual entities. So these things take on personalities as I make them. The more components I add to it, the more that personality comes out. And by the end of it, each one of them is this unique thing that I've ushered into existence. Maybe it's a God complex. I think somebody could really have a lot of fun psychoanalyzing that from me. I don't really care. It's just something I'm attracted to, aspect about artwork. And so I do it. And since I got out of college, I kind of like gave up on why somebody else would think it's interesting. And I just do what I want. And then there's an audience that seems to be interested in that. So.
Yeah, you build and they'll come, right?
Yeah, well, another way of saying that is every time I've attempted to make something for a marketplace, it's failed. But every time I've made something just because I think it's going to be rockin' awesome,
yeah,
even if I don't end up liking it at the end, someone else does.
Absolutely.
And so that was a path of success, and I just rolled with it.
Yeah, I think most artists who are out there working professionally or trying to get their work out there to be seen go through that same thing. Like, oh, okay, this really seems to be going on right now. I'll make a couple things that look like this and see what happens, and then it just goes nowhere. And then you're just like, oh, well, forget that. I'm just going to do what I like. And then it's like, oh man, people are responding.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like the worst thing you can do is accidentally find one thing that's really popular and then feel like that's enough.
Yeah.
I went through a period of that early in my career, and I have some, friends that are commercially very successful, but they found that one thing, and then they get upset when somebody else copies it. And I'm like, well, when you invent something, you only have a 2 or 3 year head start. That's it. After that, if it's really awesome, somebody else is going to copy it. And you should be using that 2 or 3 year head start to come up with the next thing that you'll be in front of them, not complaining about somebody catching up with you.
You might be generous in the 2 to 3 year. I think things move so quickly now that you maybe have weeks or months. Because the minute you put it out there, it's out there. And so many people can see it right away, more people than you even realize are looking. So I think if it's a really cool idea, someone's going to get on it pretty quick.
Yeah, maybe we could debate that timeline. Sure. I think I'm accurate though.
Jeremy, you had said something as you were kind of discussing the perfection of them, how they take on personalities. And they become kind of like one of a kind. They have this energy to them. I think that could be an interesting way to talk about the title of the exhibition, or at least the foundation for the exhibition, which is Post-Industrial Fetish. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what post-industrialism is, and then how the fetish part kind of moves into it.
Sure. I think you've done more reading about post-industrialism more recently than I have. But for me, I use that term as sort of a grab point for the viewer, because I think that almost everyone, at least in the United States, almost everyone's come across that term in one way or another. And I think oftentimes it's usually in something active, a news story or opinion piece, where they're either talking about this great move, post-industrial, where we'll be divorced from labor and we'll just have things provided to us, that utopian sit in a couch and get around. There was a really cool animated movie about that recent, in the last 10 or 12 years.
We're talking about Wally.
Wasn't that beautiful? Amazing. And then also there's the other side, right? There are a lot of people like to throw stones at that term, and they're like, oh, well, everything needs to be by hand and go back to the craft and all this, and we're losing everything. No one knows how to make anything anymore. And so for me, it's really, I'm just taking this thing that sort of sets people on a teeter-totter one way or another, and bringing them in. It's like a trick with the scale or a trick with the craft. It's like it grabs them from a distance, and hopefully they'll spend a bit more time with it. But for me, post-industrial just sort of describes where we are, right? We have, in some ways, divorced ourselves from labor. We've tried to move to a service economy locally, and yet we still need products. We still need physical things. Like, we can't live virtually yet, right? A digital Big Mac is a lot less filling than the actual Big Mac.
Unless it's an NFT.
Well, I think I would be very rich, but very hungry, right? Really quickly. So the practicality of the physical world and the physical nature of making things is intriguing to me. And then fetish, again, it's very consciously chosen to be a word that causes that teeter-totter of people's opinions. Fetish, I think, in the conservative wing of our culture, a fetish is seen as something that's like naughty, right? Like it has a connotation to sex or deviance or whatever is ungodly or whatever, that kind of thing. But the true term of fetish is really more about something that is appealing to a person to the point of distraction or overwhelmingness. So I'm throwing these words together, partially picking things that I feel like even the less than well-educated could grab onto and become interested in, but also to provoke. It's really a pointed stick in a lot of ways. Just think about stuff. I feel like we need more thinking. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of writing on the internet, but there's not very much thinking. The thing that I like to find, and then I go, little mustache twist, is when I read through the comments at the end of an article of something I'm really interested in, and one of the comments is posted about something that you can tell they didn't actually read the article. Or if they did, they didn't actually comprehend any of the words. Like, I've tried to read it in Chinese, which would be very interesting because I don't know Chinese, but I can make a comment at the end. So yeah, it's a poke.
It's a poke. I like to think of the word fetish kind of like as I was doing the research into your work and how to like build the exhibition. The idea that it's an item used for worship, or it becomes like this thing that actually became like a depository for like hopes and dreams and wants and desires and needs, and it just kind of became this thing that became so precious. And then you think of idols as like people would travel and like make pilgrimages to go and find these idols, and then like really spend some time with them and have an experience with them. And then kind of as you said, it kind of teeters back into this idea of like obsession or like this need to have it, need to be around it kind of thing. And I think that like if you were to survey the show it's like I like to think of the pieces on the panels as each one having like a different reason to approach it. Like this is the one that I go to when I need something. This is the one I go to when I want something, and another one I need to go to, just to kind of like share my secrets with and kind of things like that. And like them being on the panels like this, it feels like something that you kind of need to like approach quietly and spend some time with by itself, and like have like a hushed conversation with them. And because everything's so stark, I mean the gallery, aside from these cast pieces behind us, this may be the least amount of color that we've had in the show, but I like that because it doesn't mean you have to have color to make big impact. Like each one, like you see these things and you're like, oh, I need to go closer to see what that is. But in so doing, I feel like you're approaching like individuals that are kind of saying their own thing to you, or like people like like speakers would be almost like like I'm going to go over here and hear what this guy has to say, and so on and so on.
Yeah. One of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen to me is this power idol at the Metropolitan Museum. So the museums that I go to repeatedly, I have what I call my old friends, which is a selection of work that's almost always on permanent display or on display from the permanent collection. And I go back and I visit them, and sometimes that's the first thing I'll do. And one of them is this really beautiful object. It's from Western Africa, and it's a wooden figure about 3 feet tall, and it was of religious significance to its home population, original population. And one of the things is it was very active. You pounded a piece of iron into it as part of the participation with it in their belief system, and it's immensely beautiful. And then I had an opportunity to see the other 7 in the known world that still exist, all in one location as one show. And it blew my mind to the point where I was like, I want to make artwork about this, but it's not my culture. So I can't just make a wooden thing and pound metal into it. That would be unethical. So I had to start really thinking about, okay, so what is my culture? What is my background? How can I get to the same thing? And it turns out that although I love this one item aesthetically from this different culture, it's something that humans have repeated again and again and again and again. So it can be, in a sense, a global idea. And I just took it and made it a atheist American idea, right? With these. And so, yeah, the panels, they have that sort of like altar or icon aspect of it. That's not accidental. That's not all they do. I love to take these coded things and divorce them of specificity enough that they can become multiple things simultaneously. So I like that you brought that up, that religious aspect of the fetish. And what's really interesting to me is like using the term fetish for those sort of religious or spiritual artifacts, to me is very interesting because it seems pointed, it seems very Eurocentric, it seems like a way to disparage somebody else's systems, where then you can use other terms for your own systems. So I like that, and I like how that word has evolved to be, I don't know, it could be a Jesus or it could be a dildo. It could be a Jesus dildo. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, that's really fascinating, and that sort of, once again, that teeter-totter, right? That like getting people to start rocking back and forth between extremes is fascinating, because I just sit in the middle and like a tennis match, I watch them bang off this idea, bang off this idea. They're both nuts in my mind.
Both nuts in my mind. And I think that's kind of what it's kind of like walking into a gallery, though, or a museum, right? Like we go in and we appreciate art because you walk into a space and you already acknowledge it as being impressive, right? Because it's on the wall. It wouldn't have gotten there if someone didn't decide that it was impressive enough to be there. Yeah, I think maybe we approach, like you said, you have your old friends that you go to almost right away. I feel like we celebrate art the same way that we do, like kind of like religious icon or something like that. We always go back to them or expect them to be like you place more meaning on them than sometimes they have to, right? Like remember that pair of glasses that fell and just happened to face a gallery wall, and then everyone thought it was this brilliant art installation, but it was really just a guy who lost his glasses. Like you walk in and you expect that what you see to be important because you're in a place where everything is important.
Oh yeah. Oh man, in college we used to play with that all the time. We used to make up signs for things we would just find in the hallway. You know, the janitor would stop and lean the broom or the mop up against the wall or have a cart with stuff, and then we would create some sort of conceptual BS and then make it on a tag and put it right on the wall, right behind there. Yeah, it's funny to me. I think that's my fascination with craft too. I think it overcomes that. I'm not a big fan of just like find a bunch of crap and put it together kind of thing. To me, I want some care in the control of the materials. I want more than just regurgitation. It gets sloppy sometimes, you know, when it's divorced from some attempt to have mastery over materials.
And so, speaking about material, what made you like when people read that these are brass and sterling silver? It's not what we think of as brass and sterling silver. Like the brass parts are actually quite dark, almost like graphite gray black. The sterling silver is powder snow white, and they think that you've like done something to it to mask its quality. But I mean, even I have heard you talk about it and don't quite understand the process of it. But you know, since we're talking about material, like what drew you to brass and sterling silver for these, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about what they actually like the process of getting them to look as they do.
Yeah, sure. I think so. Both of my degrees are in metalsmithing, so they're like the fine craft wing of the fine art education, formal educational system. So that puts it in a really awkward place, right? It's fine craft in that there's a tradition of using these materials to make things that are functional. Before there were other replacements for them, cups, jewelry, architectural things, but they're housed in schools of fine art education. So then it's always like about then manipulating that to make something that's arty. And so the fine craft folks I love for a lot of reasons. Their mastery of material, their love of history, their attention to detail, they're willing to risk when they make. And yet at the same time, I get tired of looking at how many different kinds of teapots, you know? And then if a teapot doesn't work, then why is it a teapot? Why not just make a sculpture? Why does it have to be a teapot? You know, so there's like this constriction there. And then I always love the fine art side of things because that restriction was divorced from it. Like it doesn't have to be a teapot, it's just a work of art. The work of art then is an engagement for contemplation, or I see it that way. You see something, makes your mind work, then it's active. It doesn't have to song and dance, it doesn't have to be animated, it doesn't have to be motorized, it doesn't have to have blinking lights. It's already active because you paid attention to it and now your mind is running. Solowitt's awesome at that. Solowitt's sculptures are static sculptures, but they're animations that he makes you animate when you move it. It's awesome. He manipulates you into finishing his work. It's fantastic. It's genius. So I always found myself teetering between these two groups, right? I love the quality of the craft, the materiality of fine crafts. I love the concept and the divorce from function other than as a work of art of the fine art area. But they're neither one of them accept me because I'm too conceptual for the craftspeople and I care about how well it's made and how it fit into the art world. Or at least that's how I perceive myself. So I'm always like, you know, sticks out for both directions. So these are sculptures, but I'm using craft materials because I love working with them and I love what I can get appearance out of them. So I love brass. It's a wonderful material. It's my favorite material to work with. above anything else. And you can get this brilliant black with it, lots of different colors with it by chemical patinas. And then sterling silver is a beautiful material because it seems so precious, and yet it's not really that expensive because it's silver with copper alloyed into it to reduce the overall cost of it and to make it a little bit more durable. And so it does relate to brass in a certain way. In fact, actually, if you work with them sort of incorrectly in the studio, you can make them both copper colored. So then they both look like copper, even though they're brass and silver, respectively. The white on the silver, I'm such a jerk. Everything's about poking. I realize I just walk around with a pointed stick and I just poke everybody with it all the time. So the sterling silver, like I said, it's an alloy, right? Well, one of the things that you can do is a thing called depletion yielding. So you can heat a piece of sterling silver up to a certain temperature, let it cool, and then put it in an acid. And then do that repetitively. And what it does is it causes all of the copper at the surface of the metal to be dissolved away in the acid. So you heat it and the copper kind of like comes to the surface of the alloy, you put it in the acid, it eats the copper away but leaves the silver. And so that powder white appearance is just this very, very fragile surface of powder of fine silver building up on the surface. It's super fragile. You can scrape it with your fingernail, right? And then all of a sudden you'll get that shiny silver back and ruin the Snow White. But the other beautiful thing about it is a pure silver doesn't change color nearly as fast as sterling, because the copper, it speeds up the tarnishing effect of it. So it also allows them to stay untarnished longer.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, so it's like I'm taking all of this fine craft metalsmithing knowledge to make sculpture to just poke. I don't know. I guess I'm really trying to get I'm trying to get a reaction out of people. I'm trying to get people to pick a side and think about why. And a subtle side, not a weird fanatical side. It's so easy to go to the end of a line because there's nowhere else to go. You just go, it's super easy. You go to the end of the line, I'm at the end of the line. But how do you pick the middle of the line? How do you pick the exact middle of the line? Right? That's tricky when it's something that you can't physically measure.
Do you feel like there's a line with your work? Like I know for myself as someone who draws, someone who paints, like it can be really easy to overwork a piece. Almost to the point where like in one brushstroke it can be over. Like, oh, it's too much now. Like is there a moment with your work where you feel like you come up against that, like, okay, I need to stop now, or it needs more? Like where is that line for you?
Yeah, I do have that, but not at a point of completion, right? That I think that works a lot more for drawing and painting, I think. And when in my drawings, I definitely deal with that as okay, that's enough, and it's complete. In the sculptures, that comes up multiple times at little moments, like, how many holes should I drill in this? Should I drill holes in this? You know, because holes, especially patterns of holes, become decorative, right? And so how do you maintain ornamentation and description without getting into decoration? Because I feel like decoration is like the negative of ornamentation. Like, ornamentation is purposeful, it's meaningful, it's connected to the whole thing. Decoration is something you do to hide something that's ugly or to cover up something.
Just move the plant in front of it.
Exactly. So I'm every time I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna make. I love space frames. Space frame is the if you don't know what space frames is, it's the engineering tendency to use a system of straight lines to create a volume that has structural integrity, right? So the crane members with their little lines that crisscross, that's a space frame technology.
So like on Untitled to Exceptionalism 6, right? This guy here?
Yeah, that would be like the entire structure outside of the tracks itself. That's a space frame mentality. And so when I'm working out that, I start with outer proportions, and to think about, well, how many divisions do I want? How many little diagonal triangle cross members do I want to put in there? Because I don't really need very many to meet my structural needs. It's not like I'm load testing it to lift drywall into the back of a truck or something. So it's aesthetic. And so, and what's really interesting is I don't plan them out that great in advance. I have a vague idea of where I'm going. Like looking through a lace curtain, you can see a shape behind it, and you can get a vague outline, but the details and the specificity is all missing. So I start like that, and I try not to plan it all out, because to me, that's too engineering. If I get it all planned out in the drawing, then why the hell make it? What's the point of that?
So to that point, for each piece that we have on the wall, it's accompanied by a drawing of the sculpture to a degree, or to a pretty exact degree?
Oh, a very exact degree, actually. So the drawings are reworkings of my sketchbook. So like I said, I start with a basic idea with some proportions, and then the drawings, you'll see that there's multiples of a certain part that have different iterations. And so that's my thinking process. And so oftentimes I've made one component already, and now I need to compare it next to a variety of choices of what the next piece could be. And then I'll do it again and again and again. And I do that all in my sketchbook as I'm working. I make notes about sizes and scales, and my memory is poor, so if I need to remember a number that I've measured and take it over to the lathe to turn apart, then I write it down. Or I like physically do math just to make sure that it's recorded and I can backtrack my process. So if there's a mistake, I can find it. If I just always put the solution down, I don't know where I might have gone error-wise. And then for the drawings, I basically reproduce that work, but organize them to be a little more aesthetically pleasing. Because in the sketchbook, it's just about the need. The sculpture is the primary. The sketchbook isn't. But there are a lot of things that end up in these final drawings that are happenstance or intuitive in the sketchbook. So there's a dialogue between that. So yeah, you'll see in these drawings, like this one that for Exceptionalism 5, the drawing for Exceptionalism 5, I was trying to work out what I wanted the internal component of the track sidewalls, the support mechanism, to be. How much detail or decoration based on referencing a machine, or an actual machine, did I want, and where was too far. And if you compare that to the final sculpture, you'll see that I arrived somewhere in the middle, right? Which is a lot of my problem solving. I'll like, okay, here's an idea, and then how far before I fall off the cliff over here? And I never go up to the edge of the cliff. I always take one big fat step over the cliff, because the only way I know if I've gone too far is if it's catastrophic. And then I'll go back the other way. It's not very subtle.
Okay. So, I really like the drawings, and I've been spending more time with them. I feel like I look at the sculptures so much because it's this thing that's like coming out at you, and it's got a presence all its own. Then I've been spending time with the drawings, and I really like what you do in them to kind of take them more from just like here's a schematic, or here's a polished version of what was in my sketchbook, and you're doing things to them that make them more considered, like the addition of like vellums or like tracing papers over them, kind of like pushing things in, moving things up. You like add just a little bit more pressure in the corners of some of the drawing. Like I always like seeing it in a drawing where the intersections are I guess, pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it just kind of makes for a really interesting visual texture, and I feel like you're doing that in your drawings. And I'm wondering, like, when you are making, like, do you make the drawings for them to be their own thing eventually, or like, is it just kind of like I needed this for a time to get this piece to work, but now I have this other thing that I can go back and maybe focus on and give it its own energy?
Yeah, so the drawings in my sketchbook are very much the necessity to make the sculptures. And I find them really beautiful, and I love looking back at them personally, but they're always a little bit too awkward to stand on their own. So the final drawings being based off them are my sort of like elevating that sketchbook image. It's like in a way, I don't feel like I'm actually creating a separate drawing. I'm taking the sketchbook and I'm giving its personality a new home. It's like a slightly upscale home. They are intended to be absolutely autonomous. They're nice here next to the sculptures. When I've done drawings and sculptures before, I've actually purposely put them at opposite sides of the gallery so that it wasn't a compare and contrast, so they could be a little bit more on their own. And again, to force people to poke sticks, I know. But the vellum, the tracing paper, that's an artifact of the process. I am entirely too lazy to redraw something over and over and over again exactly, especially when I'm looking for variations on them. Mm-hmm. So I know I have a component that I want to be this long, and I know it needs to have this certain thing at either end, and then how those two ends are connected is the variation I'm seeking. So I'll take my first iteration, I'll trace it on tracing paper, flip it over, retrace that, and now I have a duplication machine, and now I can just duplicate it again and again. The duplication comes out a little bit lighter, and it allows me to draw my variations over it. So I'm getting a very precise, consistent relationship between the things that I want to stay, so that when I compare the variations, I'm comparing them as evenly as possible. It's a little bit of a mania for me, It's if I tried to redraw it by hand, but with a variation, and I shrunk it by, 2 millimeters, it would throw the proportions all off, and I would find it absolutely untrustworthy. I cannot base any decisions on this drawing. It is not accurate enough, if that makes any sense. So, and they're beautiful because I use them so often. I draw on both sides of them, and it gets that really weird depth and fuzziness, and I fall in love with them. I can't throw them away, so I stick them in the drawing. Good. Luckily, it makes them interesting. If it made them horrible, I'd still do it, and just no one would like it.
But at least you like it.
Yeah, I like it. And and then like other things, I exaggerate all kinds of lines to crisscross it, because some of my favorites do that. Agnes Martin. I just love the way Agnes Martin can make this pencil line come across a plane and just be this beautiful thing that you want to follow for end and end. And having grown up in the Great Plains and knowing flat monocrop geography, it just relates a little bit to her stuff. But then also I'm in Lancaster, and Demuth used that a lot, and I think very effectively, as well as many other artists did. And so I try to use them to line things up and make sense, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And then to get to your last point about the connections, I think it's all about the connections. I think it's where two articles meet, it's the most important thing, and in between is oftentimes unnecessary. And I find that that's sort of where my aesthetics go if I'm looking at furniture or buildings or anything, is if the connections are done really well, and even if that's elaborated on, to me that seems very purposeful. But if the connections between two things are sloppy or ill-considered, I don't care how froofy it is in between, you've lost me on it, and I don't care.
That's fair. Yeah.
That's a harsh way of saying it, but that really sums it up, It's like I'm interested in what I'm interested in, and if I'm not interested, I just don't care. I don't care at all. And it's a way of saving myself to not have to care about everything. it's too much.
Can be too much.
There's too much in the world, man. You either can be ignorant and then you think the world is simple and you can love everything in your world because it's so small. And as soon as you start to expand your knowledge of the world, it becomes too much very quickly and you have to decide where you stand on things.
Is that why these sculptures are very small?
No, they're very small because of my personal issues with scale. So I grew up in Nebraska, and if you've ever been to Nebraska, you know what I'm talking about. If you've never been to Nebraska, you should go and experience it because it boggles the mind. It's just square mile after square mile after square mile of the same thing done the same way over and over and over again ad nauseum. There's only straight lines and 90-degree roads in that whole state. Fly over it, it's a grid, it's ridiculous. I found that extremely uninteresting as a child. So for me, I always went to the little spaces in between them. The tree lines were used as windbreaks, were always planted along creeks. So now you have this mini forest and this mini canyon from this little creek, and as a little person, you can go in there with your toys, and now you're in this like gigantic Grand Canyon, and you're having all kinds of fun. This is a fantastic fantasy world. So for me, that relationship to scale came out of that early sort of hide from the larger, boring monoculture of industrial crops. You've seen one cornfield, you've seen every cornfield ever in the history of cornfields. And so that's part of it. And then later on as an adult, I realized that if you take something people recognize and you shrink it down, the ooh factor kicks in. Ooh! And anything you can do to get people to pay attention to your artwork for more than 1.7 seconds is a win.
Yeah. So,
there's serious and then not so serious. There's practical and then there's philosophical reasons.
So how about these guys?
Yeah.
I mean, so we're talking about like playing in the creek, and it's now that creek, right, is a canyon.
Yeah.
There's an unmistakable like toyness to these, and I don't know. How do you feel about that?
That's 100% on purpose. These are the counterpoint, the antithesis to the rest of the work. The rest of the work is miniature, but it's not intended to be toys. And part of the reasons why they're attached to panels is so that you cannot play with them. Although every one of them can be removed from the panel in a way that still allows you to play with them, because I'm such a nerd about that. But they're not toys. So these are the toys. And those are super precious, made out of in some ways, semi-precious materials with a lot of time involved. And these are polyurethane plastic. These are cast, that takes very little time to make each one of them. I've simplified the forms so that they don't compete with the complexity of those. All the detail has been removed. I purposely made the mold split in a way that shows the mold lines and disconnects two of the pieces so that they aren't precisely cast as an antithesis to those. And I chose the colors, to be very colorful as the exact opposite of those. They're also ready to be touched. Mm-hmm. Those are not. So that was what I was thinking when I was making these, was a counterpoint. And in the unromantic business of art as well, they're the antithesis. These are almost disposable money. They're not much more than a nice dinner for two. Those are quite a bit more expensive than that. And so it's about having these again, that teeter-totter thing. It's always just like back and forth, this balancing act between plus and minuses, or lefts and rights, or reds and blues, or goods and bads, or right or wrongs.
I've been appreciating them because, as a child, I had a lot of collections. Like I was the kid who was like buying the toys and leaving them in the package, never playing with them because they just wanted to go and there's one on the wall and be with one another. So like my toys hardly got played with except for like a couple that I already got that were half busted. So I'm like, well, these are trash now, so I'm just gonna wreck them. But I look at these and like I like them for the play aspect of them, or like the potential for play, because they are plastic. Like they have the feeling of like a late 80s, early 90s toy that was like made well enough. And I don't like, I just love seeing them all lined up like this, because this is exactly how I would do them. Like I would buy one, take it home, set it there, and be like, oh, that's a memory of that show. But like, I do that anytime I go somewhere and see something really fascinating. I always end up taking a little thing home and like remembering it. But like that's kind of how like I play mentally with it, because I'm just like, oh yeah, I remember that, and I like reminisce about them.
Yeah. Well, early on in my formal art education, I became very aware of gift shops at museums. Right? They're big things. Like many museums, you can't enter or leave without going through the gift shop. They've made it part of the path, and it's on purpose.
The documentary, the same thing.
Yeah, and at first I was like, burn all the gift shops. Burn them all, right? Because I just thought, oh, wow, it's just like people are spending more time shopping for which mug they're going to take home than actually looking at the artwork, which is true. Go to a museum, time how long someone stands in front of Van Gogh's painting, and how long they think about which of the Van Gogh painting printed objects they're going to take home for themselves. And that was really upsetting to me. And then it flipped. And I recognized that the people care so much about this painting. Maybe they don't understand it. Maybe they don't know why they care about it. Maybe they care about it really because other people have made it so important. But whatever it is, I'm not trying to judge why they care about it. They obviously care about it enough to spend their money on something. They couldn't take the painting home. That's ridiculous. But they can take this home, and now they're invested in that artwork. And so for my thesis show, for my MFA, I did create a gift shop as 1/3 of the show. And I loved it. I loved the idea of taking something and making these riffs on it, taking these variations, making these things. Like, what can you do? This, that commodification of it. It's like, yeah, I'm 100% an American, right? Commodification. Let's do it. And then I really like that approachability. And it allows people to get involved in the artwork without having to be of means, which I think is also very American, or at least what I believe is like our better nature as Americans, that idea of accessibility. And so it's a little about accessibility. Yes, does it benefit me to have something somebody can plunk down some money on that can't afford that? Yes, capitalist. But it's also a way for somebody to get involved in the artwork that can't afford something like this. So yes, equality.
Yeah. And there's an edition of 50 of them, right? So now,
yes.
Like, it's not a matter of like, I got here late and it's gone, or like you have potentially 49 other chances.
Exactly.
To come in and pick one up too. And then like I can't help but like when I have like they're all numbered and like signed on the bottom of them. So I'm like, oh man, okay, so like where's the early one, or like where's the last one? I don't know. It appeals to a lot of different parts of going out and seeing something and being able to take part of it home with you. That like exactly what you're talking about. It's the gift shop aspect of it. Of like, yeah, I can how long could someone stand here and decide which color they want to take on? Like, so
I watched that during the opening.
Yeah.
A lot of time. Some people spend a lot more time deciding what color than down this aisle of stuff. And I mean, it's not a criticism, it's just an observation, right? It's a description of what happened. And it's fascinating to me, that kind of thing.
Well, color creates variation. The form, the shape of them, they're all exactly the same.
Yes.
But now it's a matter of like, I have a choice to make.
And they're not precious, right? Because the value of them is low, the material of them is unprecious. I mean, it's a very durable material. You could knock them on the ground, you can touch them. So there's a less of an aura of do not touch, or like a little bit, like, to get back to what you were talking about, the idea of them being idols or something that you approach with a certain mentality, you know, and introspectiveness. I think this dismisses that a lot in the preciousness or the high spirituality, and it hits more at the low animalistic aspect of hunter-gatherer, accumulating for nutrition or support.
I'm not sure about that.
No?
I feel like being able to stand in front of this and think about, okay, I know one of these is mine. Which one? And then it's the matter of like, oh, I like that one's a little too dark. And just like that one. That's the one that speaks to me. That is now like, that's the one that jumped off the shelf and said, no, this one's yours.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like there is definitely an instant connection made with one when you're like, that's the one I need.
Yeah. Yeah. See,
and maybe that's hunter-gatherer, but I think that's also like this, like, that it's kind of like you can run your hand over them until someone tells you to stop.
And no, I think that's a absolutely relevant point of view from it. It just occurs to me as you're saying that you and I have a very different relationship to that experience and that act, right? The collecting. Like, I never collected anything really as a kid, and if I did, if I have anything that even approaches what I would consider a collection, they're not new things. They're really well used things, for that patina and that, for me, and that's a little bit why I find it aggressive of me to choose things like such a finicky finish on sterling silver for the sculptures, because I hate new things. The worst thing is when it's shiny, because it'll never be shiny ever again. That's like the worst time. Like, I feel so bad for jewelers because they spend all this time polishing something and the first thing it gets is unpolished, right? Fast in some cases, right? Because not everyone puts it back into this nice little velvet space. It goes clunk down on the counter. It goes plunk in a jar with 50 other things, including markers and coins and stuff, right? And so I just, that just drives me insane. So I don't like shopping. I don't like choosing new things. I don't like collecting things and keeping them perfect. I like banging them up. The first thing I do when I get something is use it. And then it has the impact of that use on it.
Well, sure, once it gets its first scratch, then it's fine.
To me, it's more beautiful, right? It's more beautiful after that fact. So I love that, because you and I, we have very different philosophies in that relationship. And I dig those kinds of things, Like, I don't want it all to be the same.
Back in Nebraska.
Oh, yeah. No, I hate that about anybody's choice. Oh, everybody should do this. No. No, sir. Why? What's the point?
We are coming up on about 5 minutes to 8. But I want to see if any of our guests have questions, or if there's any questions in the chat. Feel free to drop them in and we can take a look. Okay.
I wasn't lying. I could talk for 3 hours straight. Any of my students know that. My wife knows I can go more than 3 hours.
Is that Nathan's question, Nicole?
Yes.
So, Jeremy, Nathan's asking, have you heard of anyone using the small idol sculptures as ring holders? I ask because it reminds me of one.
No, but I've heard a couple of people mention that as a possibility. Hey, you pay for it, it's yours, do whatever the hell you want, right? I have no control over it after that. It goes out into the world, and I just have to be okay with that, so.
Yeah, it is funny to hear what people think of them. We've had people say they are cranes. We've had people think, but particularly the green ones are tanks.
Yeah.
We had a customer really thoughtful customer who felt that they look like inkwells in a quill.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like that people are finding different things in them.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite comedians, in relating a story about a verbal conflict they had with somebody, just said, hey, that this is art, and you're free to interpret this art in any way you choose. And then he goes on to talk about how he has a particular point to make, or a particular place to come from when making that art that may conflict with the person's view of it. But that's the case, and visual language is tricky, because if you are too explicit with what you're trying to say, it becomes a stop sign. And it just hits, and then it's over. And then what's the point? A stop sign does a really good job at what it's intended to do, but I wouldn't stand around for 15 minutes contemplating a stop sign. It's over with like that. So I always try to make things that are ambivalent enough, right? Just enough structure to grab your attention and hold you long enough to demonstrate its ambivalence and its inability to be figured out easily or quickly. But a ring holder is not the first thing that I thought they could also be. But I'll just save that for myself.
I think we even talked about it being like, when we were doing the installation, that we could attach it to a wall, it could be like
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that mental game, just picking something and seeing how many different things you can do out of it. I think it's an improv task.
Yeah. Whose line is it anyway style?
Yeah, absolutely.
Jeremy, let's see. Yeah, Jessica Sponsler is asking, I have a question. You talked about visiting favorites whenever you go to a museum. What was your most inspiring museum experience when you saw a work or group of works that inspired you the most in your own work?
Oh, well, I hate singularities. I can't pick a single one. There are several of them. The ones that jump to my mind, I think that continue to impact me, is I saw some Gustav Klimt paintings with the original embossed copper frames on them, because he actually came from a family that had metalworking experience in it, and they were really beautiful, and they brought the image out of just the surface of the painting and into the three-dimensional. The power idol at the Met, Brancusi's work is always meaningful. I have a handful of museums there. I have old friends of his there. But I don't like to do I got an argument with a friend. I said, can you imagine there being the single best artwork in the entire world? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I could find the best artwork in the world. And I said, you're ridiculous. By what criteria could you possibly measure every artwork in the entire world by?
Against every other artwork.
He says it, I don't see it. I can't even fathom it. So I don't do singularities, but hopefully that answers the question enough of the top ones.
I always felt it was at the Philadelphia Museum, going back into the Cy Twombly room, those massive paintings, like those are ones that I always have to go back and see.
Yeah.
And at the Met, like I never ever could ever paint this way, but William Bouguereau's paintings, they're just these ultra, they go beyond hyperrealist to me, and they do something that I've never seen another painting do. And it's all of like figures, like people working in the fields and things like that, but I'm just like, my God, if I could ever paint like that. But like, it makes you want to just like pitch a tent and decide you're living there from now on, and like have your mail sent to the Met, because that's just where you're going to be for the rest of your life. But
yeah, my one place that meets that criteria is the Brancusi room in the Philly Museum of Art, because it's like, that's all that's in that room. It's a really unique room structurally. And then it's like the most Brancusis I've ever seen in one place, from all different periods of his career. So yeah, I find that fascinating.
I suppose if there was a museum that had like all of my favorites in it, it would be Dia Beacon, right? Like, my God, that's just like it's a dream list of all the artists that I could ever want to look at forever and ever. Those Solowit rooms, Donald Judd's, Richard Serra's there. Agnes Martin's got a whole wall, massive wall. Yeah. So Jessica, that's a great question, because now it's got me like, oh yeah, that's wrong.
She's also added a couple comments.
Any work in reality is much better than a pixelated version on a flat screen.
Yeah, Jeremy, you might want to take a look at those too.
There's also another question.
Oh yeah. That was beautiful. There were so many intensively large, simple manipulations there. But Ai Weiwei is an artist, I think, that uses scale more powerfully than almost anyone else.
And Justin is asking a question. You talked a lot about metalwork. Is there any intentionality in using the wood that the pieces are mounted on? Sorry about that, Justin. I'm trying to read small text on the screen.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I love working with metal. It's my favorite material, but I don't feel like it's a good solution for every single thing all the time. And with the panels, the panels started out with a way of controlling the space around the sculptures. They were originally conceived as existing just on a flat wall, which is probably way too much ego and not good aesthetics. So the panel was a way of controlling the space so that they had enough space and they weren't considered to be this dinky little thing that could be crammed in a corner or next to something. But not so much space that it was the entire wall. Because, good Lord, that's the ego sculptor in me. It's just like, I want to make it big. I want to make it 12 million miles tall, right? Like, how many sculptors have you ever talked to and you ask them what they're making and they tell you how heavy it is?
Yeah.
Go to blacksmiths and sculptors. What are you making? Oh man, it's 400 pounds. Oh man, it's 5 tons. And what? It's a 5-ton pile of crap? Or what? Like, what does the weight have to do with it except for ego? So the panels really started about that controlling of space, and being a fan of minimalism, mid-century Euro-modernism, I just love that smooth and that simplistic, that violated space that you only experience in the rarefied worlds of like museums and galleries or the showroom of your favorite toy shop, right? And it's never that good ever again. And so the wood panel was really coming out of that. The plywood was used in walls and a lot of mid-century architecture, and it's warm, and it's appealing, but it does more than that, right? Because once you put that little idol of a machine inside that rectangle, it's now in a space that it's doing work.
And the ply itself also takes on kind of like a topographic quality to it. Like you look at it as earth, as peaks and valleys and rivers and streams. And I mean, the majority of I'll say the sculptures on the wall like all mimic earth moving machines or machines that were made for construction, which often means either clearing space or digging down into a space. And I like that the ply itself kind of creates an open plane for it to exist in.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest crimes of our system of construction is that it's almost always based on a complete annihilation and then a rebuilding. We want to build on this lot, has these beautiful trees. We want to build this house, and we want this house to have all these trees. So first thing we do is cut down all the trees so we can build the house, and then we plant new trees. That are going to take a generation to be, it's like, we're just, the hell with that. It's easier if we just cut down all the trees. So there's a little bit of that in there as well. But again, it's orienting, it gives it that frame, it gives it that sense of protection from the rest of the world around it too. So there's some preciousness involved. Again, I try to take something and distill it down to as simple as possible, and yet still do a ton of things at once. Should do more than one thing. If it only does one thing, that's easy. I think that's easy. Just do one thing. Just do that.
Potentially.
Yeah. I don't know. I went from these tiny 3-inch tall sculptures, and the next day I started a 15-foot tall sculpture.
But how much did it weigh?
I have no idea. Because it breaks down to parts I can carry.
I
build cranes. I don't use them.
right, well,
Good
do
questions.
we have any questions here?
I do have one question. Speaking about the panel, how much consideration did you give to what kinds of shadows would be cast by these machines?
Oh yeah, I get that question a lot because they cast really nice shadows. I don't. Ooh,
You weren't in the room when I lit them.
I forgot I'm in public. I don't care about controlling the shadows. I know the shadows are going to exist. It's the sculpture's job to make the shadows. I make the sculpture makes the shadows. I don't feel like I need to be in control of every damn thing all the time. I'm an egotistical prick, but I don't go that far.
So
That's why I don't live in Florida or I don't run for president.
It's all being recorded.
it's all being recorded. Yeah. So Joanna, I actually had some control over the lighting. I focused just one on them, but I felt like that didn't do enough to kind of marry the two together, or not so much marry them together, but either the light was favoring the sculpture or it was favoring the drawing, and it needed just one additional to kind of make light of the field that they were on. So by putting two on each panel, aiming them at the corners of the ply, that's what makes that cross shadow. And I actually find them to be really striking that way. And an observation that I had made on opening night when we had it on your first Friday exhibition was in some of the drawings, the linear elements of the drawings actually mimic the shadow shapes that are being cast. And that was not anything that Jeremy had done intentionally, nor was it something that I did intentionally when lighting it. It was just kind of like this, like, there they are. Which I think is kind of cool, because the light will do that, right? Like, if you really think about what light does, it moves in all directions at once. And like, if you think about it just kind of throwing lines down, eventually it's going to hit something and it's going to cast those lines out. So
And
I think it's pretty fascinating.
Always get lit with two lights like that. When they get taken home and hung in someone's home, they always get lit like that. There's something about the sculptures, they just take care of it themselves. And I don't, it's work I don't have to do. I love it. I think I'm lazy by nature.
Nah.
Or maybe I just know, like, don't bother. They'll take care of itself.
All right. Any others? We're pretty solid. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. And to our virtual guests, thank you so much, and for all the great questions and hanging with us. And this show will wrap up on May 28th. So there's still some time to come in and see it if you're planning on making a trip in, or if you've already been and you want to come see it again. And yeah, really exciting stuff. Up next, once your show comes to a close, we'll have the 5th edition of our Pocket Art Swap on display, which will be really exciting.
Nice.
So looking forward to that. But Jeremy, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
And thanks for all of you for hanging out with us.
Thanks for everybody for coming.
Good night, everybody.